The doorbell rang twice before I even reached it. And when I pulled it open, my son was standing there with his hands shoved in his pockets, like a boy waiting outside the principal's office. 5 years. 5 years of birthdays with no card, holidays with an empty chair, and a silence so loud it sat in my chest like a stone I'd learned to carry without complaint. And now, here he was, on my porch, in the same brown jacket he wore the last Christmas we spoke. My name is Doreen Lindsay, and I have buried a husband, raised a son alone for stretches longer than I care to count, and learned that grief comes in more than one shape. I didn't know, standing in that doorway, that I was about to learn that lesson all over again. "Mama," Steve said, and his voice cracked on the word like he hadn't used it in a long time. "I know I don't deserve to just show up like this." I didn't say anything. I just watched him. "It's about Mama's birthday, the one I missed," he said. And something in me went still because he didn't say, "that time," or "back then." He said it plain, like a man finally willing to look at the thing he'd been running from. I was supposed to come. Larissa and I had already planned it, and then I let some foolish argument with you turn into an excuse to stay home. I let 4 more years build on top of that one bad choice, and I'm not going to pretend it was anything but my fault. I felt my eyes burn, but I held it. 5 years of wondering if he even remembered what he'd done, and here he was, naming it without me having to drag it out of him. "I've thought about calling so many times," he said. I'd pick up the phone and put it back down because I didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound small next to how long I stayed away. "And today, you knew?" I asked, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be. "Today, I just knew I couldn't let one more year pass without saying it to your face. If you're watching this with your evening tea or folding laundry while the kids are finally asleep, tell me in the comments what time it is, where you are right now. I read every single one, and tonight, more than most nights, I could use the company." He stepped closer, and for the first time in years, I let him. "I forgive you," I said, and I meant it down to the bone. Not because the years didn't matter, but because I had spent too long letting bitterness sit at my table uninvited. Marguerite always used to tell me, back when this wound was fresh and raw, that holding on to it would only poison the years I had left. She was the one who talked me off the ledge more nights than I can count. The only soul who knew exactly how deep that birthday cut had gone. Steve's shoulders dropped like he'd been holding his breath for half a decade. "I want to do better, Mama. I want Larissa and me to be in your life again, really in it." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw not the boy who hurt me, but the man trying to undo it. "Come for dinner Sunday," I said. "You and Larissa, and don't make it a one-time thing." "It won't be," he said. "I promise you that." I closed the door behind him that evening with something I hadn't felt in years, hope, sitting right where the stone used to be. What I didn't know was how quickly that hope would be tested, and how soon I'd wish I'd asked him more questions before opening that door so wide. The first Sunday, I made too much food. I told myself it was habit, cooking for a houseful when it was only going to be 3 of us. But the truth was, I wanted my kitchen to feel like it used to. Loud, warm, full of the smell of greens and cornbread, and a son who couldn't wait for the plates to hit the table. Steve walked in first, hugged me longer than he needed to, and Larissa came in right behind him with a bottle of wine and a smile that looked rehearsed but not unkind. "Mrs. Lindsay, this smells incredible," she said, setting the wine down and looking around my kitchen like she was taking inventory. "Doreen is just fine," I told her, and she laughed like I'd said something generous. Dinner went easier than I expected. Steve told stories from work, Larissa asked about my garden, and for a while it felt like the last 5 years had simply folded up and put themselves away. I caught myself laughing twice, really laughing, and each time it surprised me how good it felt. It was the second Sunday when Larissa started asking different kinds of questions. "So, who helps you with the yard now?" she asked, scraping the last of the gravy onto her plate. "Sherwood used to do all that, didn't he?" "I manage," I said. "Mr. Patterson down the street cuts it for me when my hip acts up." "And the bills? Do you handle all that yourself, or does someone help you keep it organized?" I told her I'd been paying bills since before she was born, and she laughed it off easily, said she was just making sure I had support. Steve didn't seem to notice the shift in her tone. He was too busy refilling his plate, happy his mother and his wife were getting along. By the third Sunday, the questions had become routine, woven so naturally into conversation that I almost didn't register them as questions at all. How was I sleeping? Did I keep my medications in one place or scattered around the house? Had I thought about who I'd call if something happened in the middle of the night? "You worry about me more than my own doctor does," I told her, half joking. "Somebody has to," she said, and there was a warmth in her voice that made the comment feel like care instead of scrutiny. I want to be honest, some part of me liked it. After years of silence, having someone fuss over me, even in small ways, felt like being seen again. I didn't examine it too closely. I didn't want to. That third Sunday, as I was wrapping leftovers in foil and Steve had stepped out to take a work call, Larissa leaned against the counter and lowered her voice like she was about to tell me a secret. "I've been thinking," she said. "I have a cousin, Verlene. She does senior check-in work, home visits, just making sure everything's running smoothly for folks living alone. She's wonderful at it. Genuinely." "Check-in work," I repeated, not quite sure what that meant. "Nothing formal," she said quickly, waving a hand like she could erase the weight of it. "Just someone stopping by, keeping you company, making sure you're doing all right. I just think you'd really like her." I wrapped the last piece of foil around the dish and didn't answer right away. "We'll see," I said. And she smiled, like that was answer enough. She didn't ask again that night. She didn't need to. I went to bed that evening thinking about how strange it was, the things people offer you wrapped in kindness, and how you don't always notice the string attached until it's already in your hand. Steve found the envelope before I did. He'd come by on a Tuesday, something he hadn't done in years, just to drop off a ladder he borrowed from a neighbor of mine and return it himself instead of having someone else do it. I was out back when I heard him call my name from the kitchen, and when I came in, he was standing there holding a shutoff notice from the gas company, his face tight with something I hadn't seen on him since he was a boy who broke a window and didn't know how to tell me. "Mama, this is 2 weeks overdue," he said. "Why didn't you say something?" "I didn't even see that one," I admitted, taking it from him. "I've been getting behind on the mail since my eyes have been giving me trouble reading the small print." That part wasn't new. A few months earlier, I'd missed a dentist reminder entirely and showed up a week late for the appointment. Since then, I'd started stacking certain envelopes aside to look at later, telling myself I'd get to them when my eyes weren't tired. Most of the time I did. Every now and then I didn't. He set the notice on the table and picked up another envelope sitting beside it. "Is this the property tax reminder?" I looked at it and sighed. That one too. I put it aside to deal with later and forgot about it. He didn't lecture me. He didn't make me feel small. He just stood there for a moment looking at those pieces of paper like they had told him something he didn't want to know. "This scares me," he said quietly. "Not because of the money. Because I think about you here by yourself, and something like this slips through. And what if it's not the gas bill next time? What if it's something that actually hurts you?" "Steve, I'm fine." "I know you're fine," he said. "But fine today doesn't mean fine every day, and I can't keep finding out after the fact that something almost went wrong." I sat down at the table, and he sat across from me, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. "What if we set up something together?" he said. "Not me taking over your money, Mama, I'm not trying to run your life, just a joint account. Something simple, where household bills get paid from one place, and I can see if something's about to lapse before it becomes a real problem. You'd still control everything. I just want eyes on it too. I want to be clear about something. In that moment, there wasn't a single thing about him that felt calculated. His hands were still dusty from carrying that ladder. His voice had the same worry in it he had the day he scraped his knee falling off his bike at 7 years old, and I had patched him up at this very table. "You really thought about this," I said. "I've been thinking about it since the day I came back," he said. "I don't want to just say sorry and disappear again. I want to actually be useful to you. This is something real I can do." There's a particular kind of relief that comes from being looked after by your own child, the kind that settles somewhere under the ribs and stays there. I had spent 5 years steeling myself against the idea that I'd grow old without him near me, learning to manage every small emergency on my own because there was no one else to call. And here he was, worried about a gas bill like it was the most important thing in the world. "All right," I said. "We'll set it up. Together." His shoulders loosened and he reached across the table and took my hand the way he used to when he was small enough to need me to walk him into school. "Thank you for trusting me," he said. I didn't tell him that trusting him had never been the hard part. It was trusting myself to know when something asked out of love started carrying a different weight entirely, and that Tuesday I had no reason yet to think it would. The joint account had been open 3 weeks when the tenant from the duplex called about a leaking pipe. It was nothing serious, just a worn-out fitting under the kitchen sink, but it reminded me how much I still had on my plate that nobody else even knew about. The duplex had been Sherwood's pride. He bought it the year before he passed, said it would give me something steady, something that paid for itself long after he was gone. I'd never told Steve the full story of how much that property meant, how it was the one piece of his father's planning I still managed entirely on my own. I mentioned it at dinner that Sunday, mostly in passing, complaining about the plumber's prices these days. "Wait, you still manage all that yourself?" Larissa asked, setting down her fork. "The rent collection, the repairs, all of it?" "I've been doing it for years," I said. "It's not so bad." "Doreen, that's a lot for anybody to carry alone," she said. And there was something in her voice that sounded almost offended on my behalf. "What happens if something goes wrong with the property and you're not able to handle it quickly? A bad storm? A tenant who stops paying? Anything?" Steve looked between us, quiet in a way that felt different from his usual quiet. "She's got a point, Mama," he said, though I noticed he didn't say much beyond that. "What if we added Steve as co-owner and gave him authority to handle property matters if you ever needed help?" Larissa said, smooth as anything, like she'd already thought it through long before she said it out loud. "Not instead of you. Alongside you. That way, if something comes up, he can deal with tenants, repairs, paperwork, whatever needs doing without everything getting tied up, waiting on signatures or court approvals. It protects what Sherwood built. It protects you." I turned the idea over in my mind. It wasn't unreasonable, not on its face. Sherwood himself used to say a man should leave his family clear paths, not tangled ones. And here was Larissa, talking about protecting exactly what he'd built, using almost the same language he might have used himself. "I'd want to talk to Aldous first," I said. "Sherwood's attorney. He's handled everything related to that property since the beginning." "Of course," Larissa said quickly. "Whatever makes you comfortable. We just don't want you to be carrying all of this by yourself anymore." I did call Aldous that week. I described the idea Larissa had suggested, and he explained generally how families sometimes added adult children to property interests or gave them authority to help handle management matters. Nothing in that conversation sounded alarming. We weren't discussing specific documents yet, only the concept itself, and by the time I hung up, it sounded like exactly the sort of thing careful families sometimes did. A few days later, Larissa arrived with paperwork she said had been prepared to accomplish exactly what we'd discussed. The following Sunday, I brought those papers to the table myself, already decided. "I want to do this," I told Steve, sliding the paperwork toward him. "Your father would have wanted you protected too, not just me." Steve read it over slowly, almost cautious, like he wanted to be sure before he signed his name beneath mine. But it was Larissa I noticed first. The way her eyes followed the pen across the page, the way her shoulders dropped just slightly, like air leaving a tire. For 1/2 of 1 second, before she caught herself and turned it into a warm, grateful smile. Something in her face looked like satisfaction instead of relief. "This means so much," she said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "You won't regret this, Doreen." I told her I knew I wouldn't. I had no idea yet how wrong I was. Verlene showed up on a Thursday with a tin of banana pudding and a smile so practiced it took me a moment to place where I'd seen that kind of smile before. Church greeters mostly, the ones trained to make strangers feel like family in under a minute. "I hope this isn't too forward," she said, standing on my porch like she'd been there a dozen times already. "Larissa's told me so much about you. I just wanted to come introduce myself properly." I let her in, mostly out of the manners my mother raised in me, and we sat in the front room while she asked about my garden, my church, how long I'd lived in this house. She had a way of listening that made you talk more than you meant to, nodding along, saying, at just the right moments. "I do senior care coordination," she told me when I finally asked what exactly she did for work. "Geriatric care coordination, to be specific. I help families keep an eye on things, appointments, medications, general well-being, so nothing falls through the cracks." "Like a nurse?" I asked. "Not quite a nurse," she said, waving her hand lightly. "More like someone who notices the small things before they become big things. I trained in it for years. It's really about peace of mind, mostly for the families." I didn't ask which school, which license, which agency employed her. Why would I have? She spoke about it the way you'd speak about something you'd done for decades, easy and unbothered, and I had no reason that Thursday to think there was anything beneath the surface of it. She came back the following week, then the week after that, always with some small offering, a casserole, a magazine she thought I'd enjoy, a new air freshener for my car that she just happened to have extra of. Each visit felt a little more natural than the last, the way a new pair of shoes stops pinching after enough wear. "You're sharper than most people I sit with," she told me one afternoon, like it was a compliment. "A lot of folks your age start losing track of little things. You haven't slipped at all." "I should hope not," I said, laughing it off. But she didn't laugh with me. She watched me for a moment, the way you'd watch something you were deciding whether to trust. "Can I ask you something?" she said, pulling a small notebook from her bag, the kind with a spiral binding and a worn cover, like she carried it everywhere. "Just for my notes. Do you ever forget where you put things? Keys, your purse, that sort of thing?" "Doesn't everybody now and then?" "Of course," she said smoothly. "What about names? Do you ever find yourself reaching for a name and it just doesn't come?" I felt something small and unfamiliar stir in me, a flicker I couldn't name, gone almost as fast as it arrived. It wasn't suspicion exactly. It was closer to the feeling of a draft slipping through a window you thought was shut tight. "I manage fine," I said, my voice a touch cooler than before. "Of course you do," she said, smiling again, that same practiced warmth sliding back into place. "I'm just being thorough. It's my job to notice things other people might miss." She wrote something down in that little notebook, the pen moving quick and certain across the page, and closed it before I could see a single word. "Just routine," she said, tucking it away. "Nothing to worry about at all." But she didn't look up at me when she said it, and that was the part I couldn't quite shake. I misplaced my reading glasses on a Monday, found them on top of the refrigerator where I must have set them down without thinking, and by Wednesday, Verlene knew about it. I hadn't told her. I'd mentioned it to Larissa in passing, laughing at myself over dinner. The kind of small story you tell because it's funny, not because it means anything. But when Verlene came by that Thursday, she brought it up before I did. "Larissa mentioned you misplaced your glasses again," she said, settling into her usual chair like she belonged there. "On top of the refrigerator, of all places." "It happens to everybody," I said, though something about hearing it repeated back to me sat strange in my chest. "Of course," she said, opening that little spiral notebook of hers. "I just like to keep track of patterns. One slip means nothing. A pattern tells a different story." She asked me about my medications that day, whether I ever lost count of which pills I'd taken, whether I'd ever skipped a dose without realizing. I answered honestly, because I had nothing to hide, and she wrote steadily the whole time, her pen never slowing. What I didn't know, what I had no way of knowing, was that 2 days earlier, Larissa had been standing just outside my kitchen doorway while I sat on the porch talking to Marguerite on the phone. I'd been telling Marguerite about the duplex, about how relieved I was that Steve's name was finally on the title alongside mine, how it eased something in me that had been tight since Sherwood passed. "There's still the rest of what Sherwood left, though," I'd said, lowering my voice without quite meaning to. "The way you do when you're talking about something private, even when you think you're alone. I haven't touched any of that. Aldous still handles it the way Sherwood set it up. Steve doesn't even know the half of it." I hadn't seen Larissa standing there. I found that out only much later, pieced together from things that didn't make sense until they suddenly did. That Thursday evening, after Verlene left, I went looking for the cordless phone I kept in the kitchen and found it missing from its base. I walked toward the hallway to check if Steve had carried it somewhere, and that's when I heard Larissa's voice, low and quick, coming from the guest room where she sometimes sat to take calls in private. I wasn't trying to listen. I want to be clear about that. I was only walking past, the way you walk past a room 100 times a day without thinking twice about it. But something in her tone made my feet stop. "I'm telling you, it's bigger than the duplex," she was saying, her voice pitched just above a whisper. "There's more. I'm sure of it. We need to move on this before she changes her mind about anything." A pause. Someone on the other end answering, though I couldn't make out the words. "No, I know," Larissa said. "But if we go the guardianship route, we don't have to wait for her to decide anything at all." I stood there in the hallway, one hand pressed flat against the wall, the words settling into me slow and cold, like water finding its way into a crack I hadn't known was there. Guardianship. I didn't move. I didn't breathe the way I normally did. I just stood there, listening to my daughter-in-law's voice on the other side of that door, realizing I had no idea how long this had already been planned. I didn't sleep that night, turning the word over and over until it lost its shape and gathered it back again. Guardianship. By morning, I decided I wasn't going to sit with it in silence the way I'd sat with so many other things over the years. Steve came by alone the next afternoon, dropping off a prescription he'd picked up for me on his way from work. I waited until he set the bag on the counter before I said anything. "Steve, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." He looked up, something flickering across his face that might have been worry or might have just been surprise at my tone. "Of course, Mama. What's wrong?" "I overheard Larissa on the phone yesterday," I said. "She used the word guardianship. I want to know what that means, and I want to know why my daughter-in-law is using that word about me." His jaw tightened, just slightly, the way it used to when he was a boy and knew he was about to get caught in something. "I'm sure that's not what it sounded like," he said. "Larissa talks to her family about all kinds of things. It probably wasn't even about you." "Steve." Mama, I don't know every conversation she has, he said, and his eyes moved somewhere just past my shoulder, the way they did when he was choosing his words instead of speaking plainly. Maybe it was about a client. She does volunteer work sometimes, advising people on family stuff. She doesn't do volunteer work, I said quietly. She's never once mentioned anything like that to me. He didn't answer right away, and that silence told me more than anything he could have said. Does she know? I asked. How much your father actually left me? The full picture, not just the duplex? Something passed behind his eyes, quick and unreadable. I don't talk to her about the specifics of what Dad left you. That's your business, Mama. That's not what I asked you, I said. I asked if she knows. I don't know what she knows, he said. And his voice had an edge to it now, defensive in a way I hadn't heard from him since he was a teenager, caught in a lie he couldn't quite finish telling. Why does it matter? She's not after anything, Mama. She just worries about you. People who just worry don't use words like guardianship behind closed doors, I said. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture so familiar to me, so much like his father when Sherwood didn't want to answer a hard question directly. I'll talk to her. I'm sure it's nothing. You know how Larissa can overstate things when she's trying to be helpful. I wanted to believe him. God knows I wanted to believe my own son standing in my kitchen, the same boy I'd raised, the same man who'd apologized to me with such sincerity. It had cracked something open in my chest just weeks before. But he hadn't answered my question. Not really. He'd talked around it, the way you talk around a hole in the floor instead of telling someone plainly that it's there. After he left, I sat at the table for a long while, the prescription bag still unopened beside me. Then I picked up my keys. If something was being planned behind my back, I wasn't going to wait around to find out about it secondhand. I was going to see the duplex with my own eyes, today, before anyone had the chance to tell me a version of the truth that suited them. The drive to the duplex usually settled something in me. Sherwood used to say that property would outlive us both, and every time I pulled up to it, I felt a little of him still standing there in the brickwork. That afternoon, I felt nothing but my stomach dropping the moment I turned onto the street. There was a sign staked into the front lawn, bright red letters across a white board, the kind realtors plant like flags, for sale. I sat in my car for a long moment, certain I was looking at the wrong house, certain some mistake had been made, but the address matched. The chipped step Sherwood always meant to fix matched. The mailbox with my late husband's handwriting still faintly visible under newer paint matched. I got out slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me, and walked up to the sign like getting closer might change what it said. A small rider hung beneath it. Under contract. Pending. Not even listed and waiting. Already moving toward a closing. My tenant, Mrs. Ouellette, came out onto her porch when she saw me standing there, her face uncertain. Mrs. Lindsay, I didn't know you were coming by, she said. I figured you knew about all this already, since the gentleman who came to do the inspection said he was your son. My son, I repeated, the words tasting strange in my mouth. He had paperwork with him, she said carefully, watching my face change. Said everything was in order. I didn't think anything of it. The place was listed a few weeks ago, and the realtor told us an investor made a cash offer not long after. Everybody assumed you were involved. I thanked her, my voice steadier than I felt, and walked back toward my car like I was moving through water. Inside, I sat with both hands on the wheel and didn't start the engine right away. I thought of every signature I'd put my name to in the last 2 months. The joint account, easy and reasonable, suggested by my own son out of what looked like real worry. The property paperwork, framed as protection, as something Sherwood himself would have wanted. I had read each document, or thought I had, nodding along to words that sounded simple because I trusted the people explaining them to me. I hadn't imagined any of it would lead here, to a red sign on Sherwood's lawn, and a stranger walking through with an inspection clipboard while I sat at home, completely unaware. The shock came first, sharp and disorienting, like missing a step in the dark. Then came something heavier, settling into my chest with a weight I hadn't felt since the week Sherwood died. Betrayal, plain and undeniable, sitting right there where my trust used to be. My own son. Whatever Larissa's part in this was, his name was tied to that property now too. He had let someone walk through that house with paperwork in hand, and he hadn't said a single word to me about any of it. I didn't cry. I want that understood. I sat in that car outside the home Sherwood built for our future, and instead of falling apart, I felt something else entirely begin to take its place. A clarity I hadn't expected, cold and exact. I pulled out my phone and scrolled until I found the name I needed. Aldous Coachman had handled Sherwood's affairs for over 20 years, knew every detail of what my husband built and how carefully he built it. If something was happening to that property without my knowledge, he was the only person who could tell me exactly how far it had already gone. My hands were steady when I pressed call. "Aldous," I said the moment he picked up. "I need to see you today. Something is very wrong." Aldous Coachman's office still smelled the way it had for 20 years. Old paper and cedar. The same smell I remembered from the week we buried Sherwood. And I sat across from this same desk, trying to understand what a grieving woman is supposed to do next. He had the duplex file open in front of him when I walked in, along with a folder I didn't recognize. "Walk me through exactly what you remember signing," he said, no greeting, straight to business, which told me he'd already guessed this wasn't a casual visit. "The joint account. For bills," I said, "and the property paperwork on the duplex, adding Steve and giving him authority to help manage things. Did you read every page of those documents? Or did you sign where you were told to sign?" I felt my face go warm. Steve explained it. Larissa, too. They said it added protection in case anything happened to me. Aldous slid a page across the desk, his finger resting on a clause near the bottom. "This wasn't limited to handling repairs or dealing with tenants, Doreen. The authorization gave Steve much broader authority than what you've just described. It allowed him to act on matters involving the property without requiring your direct involvement." "That's not what they told me." "I believe you," he said. "But that's what the paper says. And paper is what a court looks at, not what someone promised you across a dinner table." I sat back, my hands suddenly cold. So he could move forward on a sale without me knowing. "He already started to," Aldous said, "and the joint account works similarly. You didn't just add him as a convenience signer, you gave him full access, no restrictions on amount or purpose." Anger replaced the shock then, settling into me hot and clean, burning away whatever was left of the disbelief I'd been carrying since that red sign on the lawn. "Why would they need that much access?" I said, "for a gas bill and a leaking pipe?" Aldous didn't answer right away. He opened the second folder instead, the one I hadn't recognized. "There's something else you should know," he said. 3 weeks ago, my office received a records request, an attempt to access information on the full trust Sherwood set up. Not the duplex. The trust. My chest tightened. Who requested it? It came through a third party, someone presenting limited authorization paperwork that didn't hold up under review, so my staff denied it. But the request specifically asked about total holdings, not just visible property. He looked at me directly. "Doreen, somebody is trying to find out exactly how much you're worth, beyond what's sitting in plain sight." I thought of Larissa's voice in that hallway, low and certain. "There's more. I'm sure of it." "They know," I said quietly. "Or they suspect." "It would explain the pattern," Aldous said. "The account, the property documents. And based on what you've told me about this woman doing check-ins, I'd be concerned that somebody may be creating a record of your daily functioning." "Verlene," I said. "Her notebook." Aldous nodded slowly. "Doreen, I need you to hear me clearly, he said, leaning forward. I can't tell you for certain what they're planning, but I've handled enough. Estate and elder law matters over the years to recognize when several concerning things start appearing together. A denied attempt to access trust information. Broad authority being transferred through paperwork. Informal observations being collected about someone's daily life. Standing alone, none of those prove anything. Taken together, they raise questions. What kind of questions? The kind that make me think you should be very careful, he said. One possibility that concerns me is guardianship. I felt my stomach tighten. Guardianship? Because guardianship isn't really about money at first, he said. It's about decision-making authority, your finances, your property, your ability to make choices for yourself. I'm not saying that's definitely where this is headed. I'm saying that if someone wanted that kind of control, the things you've described are consistent with steps I've seen people take before. I sat very still in that chair, the weight of his words settling over me like something final. They're not coming for what I own, I said. Aldous held my gaze. If your concerns are correct, he said quietly, they may be coming for you. I started checking the joint account every morning after my visit with Aldous, something I should have been doing from the very beginning. For 2 weeks, nothing unusual appeared. Small charges, groceries, the kind of ordinary movement that almost lulled me back into believing I'd overreacted. Then, on a Tuesday morning, I opened the banking app on my phone and saw a withdrawal that stopped my breath in my chest. $4,000, transferred out 2 days earlier, the memo line reading, Care Assessment Services. I called the bank first, my hands trembling as I asked them to confirm the transaction wasn't fraud, that it hadn't come from some stranger who'd gotten hold of my information. The representative confirmed it had been authorized through the account using Steve's card, processed in person at a branch across town. I didn't call Steve right away. I sat with it first, turning the words over, Care Assessment Services, wondering what on earth would require $4,000 and why nobody had thought to mention it to me. I printed the statement that afternoon, the paper still warm from the printer when Steve came by that evening to drop off groceries, something he'd taken to doing weekly since we'd reconciled. He set the bags on the counter, same as always, easy and unaware. Steve, I said, holding the page toward him. Tell me what this is. He glanced at it, and I watched something pass behind his eyes, quick and unmistakable. Recognition, followed almost immediately by the realization that there was no good way out of this conversation. It's nothing serious, Mama, he said. Larissa needed it for something with Verlene's services. I should have mentioned it. Should have mentioned it, I repeated. Steve, you took $4,000 out of an account I trusted you with, and you didn't think to call me first? I didn't want to bother you with the details, he said. And even as the words left his mouth, I could see he heard how thin they sounded. Larissa said it was urgent, that Verlene needed payment for the assessments she's been doing, and assessments, I said. On me. He didn't answer that directly, which was an answer in itself. You used money from an account I agreed to, I said, my voice rising despite myself. To pay someone to build a case against my own mind, and you didn't think that was something I deserved to know about first? Mama, it's not like that. Then tell me what it's like, Steve. Because right now, what it looks like is my son taking money behind my back to help build whatever Larissa is planning. He stood there, the grocery bags still on the counter between us, and for the first time since he'd come back into my life, I saw something in his face that looked like guilt, with nowhere left to hide. I told her I was uncomfortable with it, he said quietly. She said it was part of some elder care planning process, that it was mostly paperwork, and would make sense once everything was finished. And you believed that was reason enough to keep it from me. He didn't answer. He just stood there, the silence between us heavier than anything either of us could have said. I set the statement down on the counter, my hand still steady, even as something inside me cracked clean through. "You're my son," I said, "not hers. And right now, I don't know which one of you I'm actually talking to." Marguerite came over the next morning before I'd even called her, said she could hear something in my voice during our last phone call that told her not to wait for an invitation. She found me at the kitchen table, the bank statement still sitting where I'd left it the night before, and she didn't ask questions right away. She just sat down across from me, the way she'd done so many times over so many years, and waited until I was ready to talk. I told her everything: the account, the duplex, Verlene's notebook, the word guardianship sitting in my chest like a stone since I'd heard it through that hallway door. She listened without interrupting, her face growing more still with every detail, until I got to the part about the $4,000 and Steve's silence. "I should have told you something a long time ago," she said quietly when I finally stopped talking. "Told me what?" She reached into the bag she'd brought with her, the same worn leather bag she'd carried for years, and pulled out a small wooden box I recognized immediately. Sherwood's box, the one he kept on his dresser, where he stored cufflinks and old letters and things too small to matter to anyone but him. "You gave this to me after the funeral," Marguerite said. "You said you couldn't look at it yet. I held on to it because I didn't know when you'd be ready. After that, I kept it because Sherwood asked me to. He said not to hand it over unless something ever felt truly wrong, unless there was a reason you needed it. I think today is that day." Inside, beneath a few folded receipts and an old watch that no longer ticked, was a single envelope with my name written across it in Sherwood's handwriting. "He gave me this the year before he passed," Marguerite said. "Told me to keep it somewhere safe, somewhere you wouldn't find it by accident. He said if anything ever felt wrong with Steve, if anything ever felt off, I should give it to you." My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a short letter, just a few lines, but I recognized every word as something only Sherwood would have written. "If you're reading this and something feels wrong," he wrote, "it's because I worried about this exact thing long before either of us wanted to admit it could happen. Steve has a good heart, but a good heart can be led by someone clever enough to aim it in the wrong direction. I built protections into the trust because I hoped you'd never need them, but I needed to know they'd be there if you did." "He said it outright to me once," Marguerite said, her voice gentle. "Years ago, before Steve even married Larissa. He told me he worried she'd be the kind of person who could turn a good man's loyalty into a tool for herself. I didn't understand it then. I do now." I sat there holding that letter, grief rising in me fresh and sharp. Grief for a husband who had seen this coming long before I let myself believe it was possible. But underneath the grief, something else began to settle into place, steady and sure. "He left me a way to fight this," I said. "He knew." "He did," Marguerite said, "which means you're not walking into this blind, Doreen. You have ground to stand on that they don't even know exists." I folded the letter carefully and set it down, my hands no longer shaking. "I'm done reacting to whatever they decide to do next," I said. "It's time I started deciding something myself." I told Steve I had a doctor's appointment that Wednesday. It wasn't entirely a lie. I did sit in a waiting room, just not the kind he imagined, and the prescription I walked away with had nothing to do with my health and everything to do with reclaiming what was mine. Aldous had everything ready when I arrived. The letter from Sherwood's box sitting on the desk between us, alongside a stack of documents he'd prepared since my last visit. "Fortunately, we still have options," he said, sliding one page toward me. "Given everything you've told me, the unauthorized transfer from the joint account, the attempted sale of the duplex, and the concerns you've raised about how these documents were presented to you, we have more than enough reason to act immediately." What does that mean for the account? It means we notify the bank today that you're revoking Steve's access and disputing recent activity on the account. No more transfers, no more authorization without your signature alone. And the duplex? That one moves slower, Aldous admitted. Reversing a title transfer takes more than a single filing, but the pending sale can be frozen while ownership is in dispute. I've already drafted the paperwork. Once filed, no closing can happen until this is resolved in front of a judge, if it comes to that. I felt something steady settle into my chest as I signed page after page, my hand sure, in a way, it hadn't been in weeks. There's something else, Aldous said, once the last signature was dry. If they do attempt guardianship, today's filings create a clear record showing you acted deliberately, understood exactly what you were signing, and sought legal counsel on your own initiative. That matters. Good, I said. Let them try to argue otherwise with my own signature staring back at them. I left his office that afternoon lighter than I'd felt in weeks. The quiet kind of power that comes not from confrontation, but from simply having moved first. For once, I wasn't waiting to find out what had already happened behind my back. I had acted, and they didn't even know it yet. I drove home with the windows down, something in me almost humming, and I let myself believe, just for the length of that drive, that I'd bought myself room to breathe. That feeling lasted until I pulled into my driveway and saw 3 cars parked along the curb instead of the usual one. Larissa was standing on my porch when I got out, Verlene beside her holding a thick folder against her chest. Behind them stood a woman I didn't recognize, a leather bag over her shoulder, the kind that usually carries stamps and seals rather than anything personal. "Doreen," Larissa said, her voice warm in a way that no longer fooled me even slightly. "We didn't want to do this without you, but some things just can't wait any longer." Verlene stepped forward, opening the folder just enough for me to see official letterhead and a line of blank signature spaces near the bottom. "This is Ms. Granger," Larissa said, gesturing to the unfamiliar woman. "She's a notary. We just need a few signatures today, Doreen, for everyone's peace of mind." I stood frozen on my own front walk, keys still in my hand, staring at the 3 of them lined up on my porch, like they'd rehearsed exactly how this moment should look. I didn't run. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stood there a moment longer than they expected, letting the silence stretch until Larissa's smile started to waver at the edges. "What exactly am I signing?" I said finally, walking past them to unlock my own front door. "It's just paperwork," Larissa said, following me inside without being invited, the way she'd grown used to doing. "A few authorization forms. Nothing scary about it, Doreen. It just makes sure someone's looking out for you in case anything happens." "What kind of authorization forms?" Larissa hesitated just long enough for me to notice. "Medical releases, financial assistance forms, care management paperwork, things that make it easier for family to help if there's an emergency." "A first step toward guardianship," I said, setting my keys down on the table, my voice steady. Larissa's eyes flickered, surprised I knew the word at all. "It's not as serious as it sounds. Let's call Aldous," I said, "since apparently we're discussing my affairs." "That's not necessary," Verlene said quickly, stepping forward with the folder still pressed to her chest. "It's very necessary," I said, already dialing, "since he's my attorney. And this concerns me directly." Aldous picked up on the second ring, and I put him on speaker, set the phone down on the table between us where everyone could hear. "Doreen, what's happening?" he asked. "There's a notary at my house," I said. "Along with paperwork, Larissa and Verlene would like me to sign." "What kind of paperwork?" Aldous asked. Verlene finally opened the folder fully. "Care management authorization forms," she said. "Medical information releases, financial assistance authorizations, standard planning documents." "Ms. Hutto," Aldous said, his voice even but pointed. "What license number is attached to the assessments you've been conducting?" Verlene's mouth opened, then closed. "I provide informal consulting. I never claim to be licensed in a clinical sense." "Then your written observations carry no clinical weight whatsoever," Aldous said. and there is no reason for Doreen to sign documents granting broader access to her medical or financial affairs based solely on your recommendations. Larissa's face shifted, the warmth draining out of it for the first time since she'd stepped onto my porch. We have observations, patterns. That counts for something. It counts for very little without a licensed evaluation, Aldous said. And for the record, Doreen filed paperwork 2 days ago revoking joint account access and disputing the duplex transfer, fully informed and fully capable, with documentation proving clear intent. The notary, Ms. Granger, shifted her weight, glancing between Larissa and Verlini like she was only now realizing what she'd walked into. I wasn't told there was an active dispute regarding financial authority, she said carefully. I'm happy to notarize signatures if someone chooses to sign voluntarily, but I'm not comfortable participating in anything that appears contested. She gathered her bag without waiting for anyone to respond, offering me a brief, apologetic nod before letting herself out the front door. Verlene stood there a moment longer, the folder now feeling heavier in her arms than it had on the porch. Larissa, you told me this was already cleared, she said, her voice tight. You said Doreen understood what these documents were. It is cleared, Larissa snapped. He's just trying to confuse things. He's an attorney explaining exactly what these papers do, Verlene said. I'm not putting my name on something that could come back on me. She turned without another word, walking past Larissa and out the door, her heels sharp against my porch steps, leaving Larissa standing alone in my living room for the first time since this had all begun. Steve showed up at my door 2 days later, alone, his face carrying the particular exhaustion of a man who hadn't slept properly in some time. Larissa told me what happened, he said, standing on the porch like he wasn't sure he had the right to come inside anymore. The notary. Verlene walking out. Come in, I said, stepping aside. He sat at the same kitchen table where he'd once shown me a shut-off notice with such genuine worry that I'd handed him access to an account without hesitation. He looked smaller now, somehow, like the weight of everything had finally settled fully onto his shoulders. I didn't know it would go that far, he said. The guardianship part. I swear to you, Mama, I didn't know that's what she was building toward. But you knew about the money she suspected, I said. You knew about Verlene's notebook. You knew about the $4,000. He didn't argue. I knew pieces, he said. I knew Larissa kept saying we needed better planning in case something happened to you. I knew she wanted records showing you were managing everything on your own. I knew she said Verlene's assessments were part of some elder care process. What I didn't know was that she was putting all those pieces together into something bigger. Steve, pieces add up to exactly what almost happened to me on my own porch. He put his head in his hands for a moment, and when he looked back up, his eyes were wet, in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. I love her, he said. Or I did. I don't even know what's true about us anymore, but I know what almost happened to you. And I know I let it get that far because I wanted to believe she had good intentions. And now I can't unsee any of it, he said. After Verlene walked out, I asked Larissa directly what all those documents were supposed to lead to. She finally stopped talking about planning and started talking about control, about how much easier things would be if somebody else could make decisions for you. That's when I realized this wasn't what she'd been telling me it was. I said nothing. She didn't even apologize, Mama, he continued. Not once. She just kept saying we needed a better plan next time. Next time. The words landed heavier than anything he'd said yet. There's not going to be a next time, I said quietly. Not with me. I know that, he said. I told her I needed space. I'm staying at a motel for now, figuring out what comes next. I'm not saying it's over completely, but I can't go home to her tonight and pretend none of this happened. I studied my son across that table, searching for the boy who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms, searching for any sign that what remained of him was still someone I recognized. I forgave you, once already, I said. For 5 years of silence. I don't know how many times a person is supposed to keep forgiving the same mistake wearing a different face. I'm not asking you to forgive this overnight, he said. I just need you to know I chose you. Even if it's late, even if the damage is already done. It is done, I said. Some of it anyway. Trust doesn't rebuild itself just because the danger passed. He nodded slowly, accepting that without arguing, which told me something had genuinely shifted in him. I sat with the silence a moment longer, deciding something I'd carried alone since the day Aldous handed me that revised filing. There's something else you don't know, I said. About your father. About what he actually left me and why none of this was ever truly within your or Larissa's reach to begin with. Steve looked up, something uncertain moving across his face. What do you mean? He said. What didn't I know? I got up from the table and walked to the hallway closet, the one Steve had probably passed 1,000 times without ever wondering what sat on its highest shelf. I came back with a folder Aldous had given me years ago, one I'd never shown a single soul outside that office. Your father didn't just leave me a duplex and some savings, I said, sitting back down across from him. The duplex was never the real inheritance, Steve. It was simply the part everyone could see. Steve's eyes moved to the folder, then back to my face. What are you saying? Your father spent the last decade of his life building a trust most people never saw the full shape of, I said. Investments, additional property, holdings he structured quietly and deliberately, so our lives could stay private and ordinary even after he was gone. I opened the folder and slid it toward him, watching his face change as he scanned the figures, watching the number finally register in a way that made him go completely still. $15 million, he said, barely above a whisper. That's what your father left me, I said. And it's why none of what almost happened these past months could have ever fully worked. The duplex, the account, even the paperwork Larissa tried to put in front of me. All of it would have eventually run into protections your father and his attorneys put in place years ago. Steve sat back, the folder still open in front of him, his hands trembling slightly against the table's edge. He knew, Steve said. He knew this could happen. He worried it could, I said. That's different. He told Marguerite years ago that a good heart can be led in the wrong direction by the wrong person. He hoped he was wrong. I hoped he was too. Steve's eyes filled, and this time he didn't try to hide it. I almost let her destroy everything he built, everything he was trying to protect. You almost did, I said, no anger left in my voice, just plain truth. But you also walked away when you finally understood what was happening, even if it came later than I needed it to. What happens now? He asked. With us? With any of this? I'm not closing the door, I said. But it's not swinging wide open the way it did the day you first apologized to me. Trust isn't something I hand out twice for the same wound and expect it to mean what it meant the first time. What do you need from me? Honesty, even when it's inconvenient, I said. Distance from anyone who treats my life like something to be managed instead of respected. And time, Steve. Real time. Not just promises wrapped in good intentions. He nodded, wiping his face with the back of his hand, looking at me the way he had the very first day he showed up on my porch, except this time without the easy comfort that had let me lower my guard so completely before. I love you, Mama, he said. I know that doesn't undo anything. No, I said, it doesn't. But it's a start, if you mean to build on it the right way this time. I closed the folder between us, the number inside it no longer a secret, no longer something waiting to be discovered by people who never deserved to know it at all. Some doors, once shut and reopened, never swing quite as freely again. Mine wouldn't either, not anymore, and not without conditions I intended to set on my own terms from this day forward.